This is not a video that I want to make, but I feel like it's going to be able to help a whole lot of people. So today we're going to talk about the bird flu that's going around and how it can impact you guys. Heads up before we get too into this video, there's going to be a lot of talking here. This is a topic that is not necessarily a pretty, shiny, beautiful, chicken-filled montage of B-roll footage. It's going to be talking about an illness, a current event that's going around in the small farm and large farm community, and hopefully give you a little bit of info on that so you can either feel more comfortable or less comfortable, or however you want to interpret it, really just to give you a take on something that's going on right now. So enjoy. Since the feed store I work at has their live goods sales license, which is licensure in New Hampshire, here where we live, that a place of business needs to sell anything that's alive, basically. Since we have that license, we have regular interactions with the Department of Agriculture in our state. And as such, I have had updates on this virus that's going around birds in the state. Highly pathogenic avian flu is kind of the official name for it. And it's gotten to the point now where it's no longer just a thing that you heard about, but it's starting to impact reality. A few weeks back, there was a farm about 45 minutes from us that had to euthanize all 80 birds that they had on their farm. There have been a few other instances of small outbreaks in the state since then, but recently, within the last couple days, there was an entire flock of wild geese on the eastern part of the state that was found to have this bird flu.
Dozens of wild Canada geese found dead near the Bellamy River in Dover over the stretch of several weeks in late February and early March. New Hampshire Fish and Game recovered at least 70 of them, all testing positive for avian flu.
As I'm sure a lot of you have heard, Murray McMurray, the hatchery where we do a lot of our business, they did have a poultry barn that was impacted, and they needed to euthanize many of the breeding stock in that barn.
This happened to be our largest farm. We had a number of very rare breeds that don't exist functionally anywhere else in the United States and some parts of the world. So our number one priority was saving these genetic lines and the genetic diversity involved in that,
which is going to lead to shortages of chicks of those rare breeds. Not a ton of shortages. It's more related to specific breeds that were in that barn, but it's something to think about, something that is happening, something that has transpired. So I wanted to talk a little bit about bird flu, what it is, what we're doing, and what you can do with your small flock to mitigate the risk, and just kind of give you kind of a bird's eye view, pardon the pun, but just kind of give you like a basic general knowledge of the avian flu that we're experiencing now, what it is, and so you're not either freaking out, but also not just kind of not paying any attention to it. Because it is important, it is, something we need to talk about, but it is also not something to be terrified of. So I want to keep this talk relatively high level. I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty of everything and turn it into a science talk, because I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist. I am just a guy in New Hampshire with a small farm, too many birds, and who's done some reading on this sort of stuff and had some updates here and there. So the bird flu that's going around is a virus that is spread, much like any other virus, the big one that we've recently gotten over as a human population. I guess you could kind of picture this as similar to that. It causes respiratory distress, it causes a few other symptoms, but in birds, really the big kicker is that it is mostly fatal. You don't typically see birds bounce back from it. Once it gets into a population, it can decimate that population, and what you're typically going to see for your symptoms in your flocks are more or less just an increased mortality rate. Birds are going to start dying, and you're not going to know why. It is spread mostly by wild birds. Kind of most commonly, at least what we're seeing up here in New Hampshire, is waterfowl, but chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, all of these birds are susceptible to it. Waterfowl, I think, tends to be the most common just because birds congregate together at communal sources. You have many different flocks coming together at water sources. Primarily the main vector they're seeing, or at least the first vectors they saw up here in New Hampshire, were waterfowl, geese, and ducks. And that's kind of where the wild, I mean, granted, we don't have wild chickens running around New Hampshire, so it makes sense that ducks would be the most common. And that's where a lot of the jump is being made from wild birds to domestic birds, is in flocks that have a combination of waterfowl, possibly with a pond on their farm, and wild birds are able to come in and land at this pond, intermingle with the domesticated birds, and then the wild birds leave, and maybe they've transferred that virus to the domestic flock. In the case of a bird in your flock testing positive, because this is a virus that is going around and it's a public health issue, it affects the food supply. The USDA does get involved. The entire flock where the bird has tested positive from is euthanized, and the birds are disposed of. There are reimbursement programs through the USDA for farmers and people that have their flocks euthanized due to bird flu. So there is a little bit of financial compensation. But if it's a meat operation or it's a profitable egg operation, that restitution is not necessarily going to make or break your whole thing. I mean, it probably will break it. Put it this way, you have nothing to gain from euthanizing your flock in this situation. It's really just going to be a big financial setback for you. There are some things that you can do to prevent the spread of this disease, both from wild birds to your domesticated flock and then among domesticated flocks in your area. The biggest kind of thing that you can do, and this is tough, and that's why we're not doing it, so this is kind of a do as I say, not as I do situation, would be to keep your birds locked up in a run with a roof over the top, so that any wild birds flying overhead, they can't defecate into your birds. They're not landing and mingling with your birds in a pond or something like that. That is the biggest thing you can do, is to keep your birds completely separate, or as separate as possible, from wild birds. Looking behind me, you can see our birds are not protected from wild birds. They are out. They've got about a 45 by 45 foot area. They have their run. They have their coop. This is just where our birds live. We're taking a chance in this regard, mainly because we don't have a whole lot of draw to this area for wild birds. Our birds are in a small enough area where the density is high enough of a population where you don't see a lot of birds landing in here to like commingle with them. We don't have a water source, so waterfowl, ducks, geese, they're not looking at this and they're saying, oh, I want to get in there. A bird could fly overhead and it could poop into the run, but 45 by 45 feet is not a huge area, and this is really just a chance that we're taking, that we're willing to mitigate. I'm not of the mindset that I want to coop these birds up and take them out of this area where they can go around and scratch and play and do everything. Putting up bird netting over top would stop wild birds from landing in here, but it wouldn't stop wild birds from pooping in the area. The other reason why we're willing to take this risk is because a lot of the other things that we're doing that don't necessarily have to do with the habitat where our birds live, but just general biosecurity practices around the farm. Some of the things we're doing from here on out to keep our birds safe involving biosecurity, we're not going to visit other farms unless we absolutely have to. I've got to go pick up the pigs in another week, so that's something where I'm going to have to go visit a farm that's got chickens. I don't know necessarily what biosecurity measures they're taking from a wild bird standpoint, but what I know I can do is that I can go there, I can wear boots that are not boots that I've worn around my farm to prevent spreading anything over there on their farm. And then I can also, when I get home, I can take my boots, I can leave them in a place where I'm not going to be wearing them into my chicken's pen. I can disinfect those boots. I can spray them down with a bleach water solution, which will kill any virus that's on there. You know, that's something that's very easy to do. It's a biosecurity measure that we can take to not bring the virus onto our farm. The other thing that we're doing, both to not spread it from our farm and not bring it back onto our farm, is we are not accepting any birds that have had interaction with other birds, possibly wild birds. We're not really taking any full-grown chickens onto the farm at all. We do have a batch of meat birds coming later this month, chicks from McMurray. We do have ducklings coming from McMurray later this month. Those are chicks that have hatched from an incubation period. There's no worry of the bird flu being passed down to those baby chicks from hatching eggs. You know, there have been times in the past where if I wanted to add to the flock, I would go to Craigslist and look possibly for full-grown birds in the breed I wanted, and now that's just not something we're gonna do. So that's kind of my soapbox moment here with avian influenza. Definitely not something that you need to freak out about and be terrified that the food supply is gonna, you know, go completely down the tubes. The last outbreak, which was in 2015, it lasted about 6 months, and over 50 million birds were had to be euthanized because of it. We're not there yet. It doesn't seem to be as big as that one, and there are still plenty of chicken flocks around the world, and you know, everyone's doing okay there. But if you've got a backyard chicken flock and you know you like the backyard chicken flock, it's definitely something you want to pay attention to and take at least a few precautionary measures to protect them from having to get euthanized if they contract it in your flock. 2 chicken videos in 1 week, folks. I know this is a lot of chicken content for you, and not necessarily the vloggy stuff that we usually do, but it is a topic I wanted to get something out there and talk to you guys about it, because I know it's kind of been, it's at least the circles that I frequent for poultry, it's been people have been talking about it, and it's worth mentioning. If this video was helpful to you and you want to see more of what we're doing on our homestead, click that subscription down below and check out some of our other videos. Otherwise, thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.